Welcome to Believing the Real, a series of talks on the theology of the real. In this episode, chapter 20 of our discussions of the theology of the real, we will look at the advent of fiat money, wherein at last money sheds its illusory guise as a tangible thing and is exposed for the intangible, consensually agreed on value that it always was. Hello, welcome to our 20th episode of the series of discussions concerning the theology of the real, belief in the real, and how this comes about. And because of Fiat, the fundamental ignorance of the individual, we rely on group sharing experience that it only can give us any knowledge, and therefore we live within the realm of atisvurium, the inter-subjective world of others represented in our minds. So this is just a recap of the basis of what we are talking about. Indeed, this too is in the context of a greater paradigm of progress and perfection, a theological paradigm which provides us with a sort of meta theory about the development and evolution of reality. And for the last few, or maybe not so few now, quite a few discussions, we have been focusing on the history of money, the rise of money as a manifestation of trust, and as something that humans use in order to interact with each other and in fact share their abilities, capabilities, products, services, etc. We have seen that as money developed, it slowly shed from itself the various accoutrements of materiality, becoming less and less connected to something tangible. And we have seen the way that there is a great rift between those who would like to go back to tangibility and who keep blaming all of our fiscal problems on the loss of such tangibility, and those who realize that there has never been any tangibility, that even what seems tangible is also a product of consent, or not even consent, of consensus, because nobody asked you if you consent to the value of money. This is the intersubjective world that you encounter as an objective form of reality. Money for us is real, even though it is completely detached of any inherent value. It's completely a product of trust and of the human mind. In fact, the intersubjective mind, the tisvurium. In any case, we saw that the evolution of money slowly reveals this deeper truth about money. As time passes, as civilization progresses, as humanity learns how to live with itself, how to make the most of itself and become more productive and realize its progression, its potential, and become more perfect, manifest the progress that is inherent in the very fabric of the cosmos, so money becomes more transparent, and it becomes more and more obvious that there is really no tangible basis for it. It's all done through agreement. And ultimately, as we move after World War II, we come to a point where, in fact, economy, the world economy, became detached from money, and we see the rise of what are called fiat currencies. So fiat currencies are actually what the sovereign says is the currency. It is detached from anything but the dictation of sovereign states, and this has become the medium in our present times, and it both manifests the intangible nature of money and allows a far greater freedom in handling the downside of the way in which the economy behaves. So today, let us look at a number of sources that discuss this rise of fiat money in historical context. And perhaps we'll begin today with a Wikipedia passage describing fiat money. So let us have a look at this Wikipedia article about fiat money. Fiat money is currency without intrinsic value that has been established as money. So what was the intrinsic value that we had before? For example, the intrinsic value of gold. But that intrinsic value is also non-intrinsic, because actually gold has no intrinsic value. Only value agreed on by society, by a civilization that saw gold as having any value. So in fact, fiat money is a currency that is true to the real state of affairs, that no currency has any intrinsic value. So fiat money is just a currency without the illusion of some value, of some intrinsic value. So it has established as money, often by government regulation. Fiat money does not have use value and has value only because a government maintains its value or because parties engaging in exchange agree to its value. This you can say for any money, although, as we saw at the very beginning, we had commodity money that had value. So like cacao seeds or gold itself, which can be used to make like gold-plated jewelry or something. So it has some intrinsic value, but also that value is not really intrinsic. It's also agreed on. It's the value that people agree on as regards commodities. So that too is an illusion. In any case, what is obvious that this sort of unspoken value of money, it not having any intrinsic value, becomes overt, becomes recognized by all where fiat money is concerned. No illusions. And this gives rise to a lot of what we called the tangibility clingers, who want to go back to gold, who want to go back to commodities, who are harking back to the days where there were strong currencies to bite into, whereas in fact that too was an illusion, and because it was an illusion, those systems eventually broke, as we saw, and gave rise to the current fiat system. In any case, it was introduced, says the Wikipedia, as an alternative to commodity money, i.e. cocoa seeds or even gold, and representative money, which was $1 in exchange for gold, or a pound in exchange for a pound sterling, silver. Indeed, if we skip to another part of Wikipedia, we will see that silver coins known as sterlings were issued in the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, 240 of them being minted from a pound of silver. Hence, large payments came to be reckoned in pounds of sterling, a phrase later shortened to pound sterling. So, in fact, the very origin of the word of the British money, the word sterling, was in silver, but eventually it became fiat money, completely disengaged from any underlying material. So here's more of the explanation in Wikipedia. Commodity money is created from a good, often a precious metal such as gold or silver, which has uses other than as a medium of exchange, such as such good is called a commodity. Representative money is similar to fiat money, but it represents a claim on a commodity, which can be redeemed to a greater or lesser extent. And we saw how there were runs on banks wanting to get the commodity for the paper that it signified, and how, in fact, certain governments, France and US, accumulated gold while the dollar represented that gold. This was the beginning, but now government-issued banknotes began to be used in the 11th century China. Since then, they have been used by various countries, usually concurrently with commodity currencies, so that the banknotes actually represented a commodity. And this was throughout history. Fiat money started to dominate in the 20th century, and we saw some of that, since the decoupling of the US dollar from gold by Richard Nixon in 1971. A system of national fiat currencies has been used globally. So ultimately, Nixon was the one that, although this was brewing, we saw it even after World War I. There was no way that people could go to back to the gold standard, but we saw that there was an attempt to do it, and that such attempts were rather pernicious and in fact broke the world, broke the economy of the world. We saw how the Great Depression was to a great extent fueled and deepened by the attempts to adhere to a fixed exchange standard against gold. And Nixon was the one who finally detached from it and said, you're not going to get any gold for any dollar. You'll only get another dollar. So going back to Wikipedia, the definition is as follows. Fiat money has been defined variously as any money declared by a government to be legal tender. So the government says this is the money and you will use that. Of course, this can be also said of commodity monies. So it's not a full definition. State-issued money, which is neither convertible by law to any other thing, nor fixed in value in terms of any objective standard. In short, not linked to gold or any other commodity, but standing in itself. This is the money, and that's its value. What's the value? $1. What's the value of $1? $1. It's completely detached from anything that purports to be real, as it were, to be some quantity. But that is the true nature of money. Next item, intrinsically valueless money used as money because of government decree. Okay. An intrinsically useless object that serves as a medium of exchange known as fiduciary money. Okay, whatever. The term fiat derives from the Latin fiat, let it be done, used in the sense of an order, decree, or resolution. So that's the basic definition. Let's have a look a bit at the history. We've already seen some of the history, but we want to go to modern history because we are at that stage. So after World War I, governments and banks generally still promised to convert notes and coins to their underlying nominal commodity, redemption in specie, typically gold, which we have seen, on demand. However, the costs of the war and the required repairs and economic growth based on government borrowing afterwards made governments suspend redemption in specie. Some governments were careful of avoiding sovereign default, but not wary of the consequences of paying debts by consigning newly printed cash, which had no metal-backed standard to the creditors, which led to hyperinflation. Hyperinflation was one of the problems when governments did not yet know how to handle their money, their paper money, and we saw some of that in the American Civil War. From 1944 to 1971, the Bretton Woods Agreement fixed the value of 35 United States dollars to 1 troy ounce of gold. So you see, it's still something backed by the imagination, by the illusion of something tangible. Other currencies were pegged to the US dollar at fixed rates. The US promised to redeem dollars in gold to other central banks. Trade imbalances were corrected by gold reserve exchanges or by loans from the International Monetary Fund. So that was going on, even though the illusion was becoming more and more transparent. It became more and more obvious that indeed there was no true backing. It was all agreement on value. Anyway, Nixon broke the system. And the Bretton Woods system collapsed in what became known as the Nixon shock. This was before Watergate. He gave the world a great wallop before the great scandals. This was a series of economic measures taken by the United States President Richard Nixon in 1971, including unilaterally canceling direct convertibility of the United States dollar to gold. Since then, a system of national fiat monies has been used globally with freely floating exchange rates between the major currencies. So that's it. Today, there is no more illusion that money is supported by anything but the trust in the robustness and health of the economy that floats it. So a good, robust economy will get a high grading and will be able to have strong currency that other currencies will try sometimes to rely on. And it depends if it is fixed or floating. We will look at that in a moment. But in any case, all currencies today are fiat. They are just currencies because we say so. Currencies dictated from on high. A central bank introduces new money into the economy by purchasing financial assets or lending money to financial institutions. Commercial banks then redeploy or repurpose this base money by credit creation through fractional reserve banking, which expands the total supply of broad money, cash plus demand deposits. Okay, these are issues that we will not go into. They are specifics, but we want to look at the broader picture. In modern economies, relatively little of the supply of broad money is in physical currency. For example, in December 2010 in the US, of the 8,853.4 billion in broad money supply, only 915.7 billion, about 10%, consisted of physical coins and paper money. The manufacturing of new physical money is usually the responsibility of the central bank or sometimes the government's treasury. So even in fiat, you see that some of the money is still tangible. It's a note, it's a coin. I can still hold it, but that too has become a very small percentage of the actual money in the economy. The Bank of International Settlements published a detailed review of payment system developments in the G10 countries in 1985, in the first of a series that has become known as Red Books. Currently, the red books cover the participating countries on Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures. A red book summary of the value of banknotes and coins in circulation is shown in a table below, where the local currency is converted to US dollars using end-of-year rates. The value of this physical currency as a percentage of GDP ranges from a high 19.4% in Japan to a low 1.7% in Sweden, with the overall average for all countries in the table being 8.9%. So that's the banknotes in circulation. So it's just a fraction of what the actual money in the economy is, how much money there actually is. So most people use money just as a digital currency, and they hardly ever use cash. Most banking institutions, most transactions conducted in the world today, any large transaction rarely uses cash. Cash is just one small level, just a very thin segment of the large ocean of fiat money on which the economy is now floating. The adoption of fiat currency by many countries from the 18th century onwards made larger variations in the supply of money possible. Before, gold was limited in amount, so that created other difficulties than inflation. It created the problem there was not enough money. Now, because you can print as much money as you want, the problem is the risk of inflation flooding the market with too much money. And there are solutions for that by raising, for example, the interest, making money more expensive, and thereby reducing the supply in the market and so on. And most banks today, all in fact central banks, are busy manipulating the supply and demand of money itself, so that there will be not too much money and not too little money. Money must fit the actual expansion of the economy, or maybe a little bit more than that. A little bit of inflation has been proven good, because if you have more money than you can use, you dream up new schemes to use that money, as it were. So this has been very productive, but also, as we have seen, it went through a number of phases. We had hyperinflation caused by excessive growth of the money supply. Today, most economists favor a low and steady rate of inflation. Low, as opposed to zero or negative inflation, reduces the severity of economic recessions by enabling the labor market to adjust more quickly in a downturn, and reduces the risk of a liquidity trap, prevents monetary policy from stabilizing, reduces the risk that a liquidity trap should prevent monetary policy from stabilizing the economy. However, money supply growth does not always cause nominal price increases. Money supply growth may instead lead to stable prices at a time in which they would otherwise be falling. Some economists maintain that under the conditions of a liquidity trap, large monetary injections are like pushing on a string. Well, I don't know how much of that is relevant. I think Wikipedia here is digressing, and we have digressed with it. So that's not really important. What is important is that fiat money currency is based on trust. And should the issuing government or central bank either lose the ability to or refuse to guarantee its value, and thereby a loss of trust, then there will be a great problem with that currency. But that does not have to occur. Sometimes, for example, the so-called Swiss dinar continued to retain value in Kurdish Iraq even after its legal tender status was withdrawn by the Iraqi central government, which issued the note. Sometimes people do not trust the government, but they continue to trust the money, or their money is stronger than their lack of faith, or their faith in money is stronger than the lack of faith in government. So to cap this summary here, fiat money is what the sovereign dictates. This should be money. It's money printed by governments. There's no backing. This is money made transparent. This is the actual nature of money made manifest. So now let us turn to read some economic texts dealing with fiat money and its implications. First, we will have a look at a text by the famous Milton Friedman about monetary policy in a fiat world. What are the implications of this rise of fiat? So on page 12 of this article, he, after describing how fiat rose and how all economies are now based on fiat money, Milton writes, these internal developments, however, seemed to me far less important in explaining the simultaneous bursts of activity than one key external development, the ultimate consequences of which are shrouded in certainty. That development is the emergence of a world monetary system that I believe is unprecedented, a system in which essentially every currency in the world is directly or indirectly or on an irredeemable paper money standard. Directly, if the exchange rate of the currency is flexible, though possibly manipulated. Indirectly, if the exchange rate is effectively fixed in terms of another fiat-based currency, e.g. The Hong Kong dollar. So there's one currency relying on another. Or in Europe, for example, the Bulgarian lev is linked to the euro. The euro can change. The Bulgarian lev changes with it. But the euro is still fiat currency. It's dictated by the EU, and it fluctuates accordingly and is adjusted according to other currencies as well. In the United States, the gradual change in the monetary role of gold, writes Friedman, was marked by two major milestones, and we have seen that. The prohibition of the private ownership of gold in 1933, because that was the currency, so they held on to it. Nobody private could hold gold, just the government. And the elimination of gold reserve requirements for Federal Reserve deposits in 1965 and Federal Reserve notes in 1968, and the end of Bretton Woods in 1971, which removed both the formal links to the dollar and the pretense that the US was on a gold standard, simply set the seal on an ongoing process, as we have seen in greater depth. The stocks of gold listed on the books of central banks are a relic of a bygone era, though a slim possibility remains that they will again become more than that at some future date. No way. He wrote this quite some time ago. This article was written like almost 40 years ago, 30 years ago. Yeah, almost 40. So it's pretty old, and of course nobody's going back to the gold. We're bringing this because we want the historical transition when it was fresh. This is 10 years after Nixon, or 15 years after Nixon. The removal by the US in 1974 of the prohibition of private ownership of gold was somewhat paradoxically a tribute to the end of gold's monetary role. Of course, now it's just a commodity. Anyone can buy gold. It's no big deal. Like you can buy anything else. It's just an object. On next page, Friedman writes, one response to various problems with the control of interest rates was the invention of money market mutual funds as a way to enable small savers to benefit from high market interest rates. The money market funds proved an entering wedge to financial innovation that forced the prompt relaxation and subsequent abandonment of control over the interest rates that banks could pay, as well as the loosening of other regulations that restricted the activities of banks and other financial institutions. Okay, in fact, this is a digression from what we are discussing here, the fiat money, but it's actually an implication that is inherent in the use of fiat money, because fiat money, since it doesn't need actual commodity to be held in order to operate, is much freer to give rise to innovations in various instruments, financial instruments. And these innovations, as part of the progress that we are witnessing, always ultimately finds a greater application and allows people who were not in the money market, who were barred from entering the market and using it to benefit from it. And so I marked it here, enables small savers to benefit from high market interest rates, because through the repackaging of debt, repackaging of various credit instruments, money becomes available to greater and greater numbers of people. And we will see this in greater depth when we come to our discussion of the 2008 housing crisis, the subprime loans, which also were in fact a way to reach out to populations, to larger populations who could not access housing before. In any case, going back to Milton, Milton Friedman, writing in just after the great break that Nixon finally carried out, and the actual rise of fiat money internationally, he writes, "It is worth stressing how little precedent there is for the present situation. Indeed, this is true innovation, true economic innovation never seen before in the history of man. Throughout recorded history," writes Friedman, "commodity money has been the rule. There's always been something tangible. Money, in the sense of a medium of exchange and unit of account, has commonly consisted of a claim on a specified physical quantity of a designated commodity. We are accustomed to thinking of gold and silver as the predominant money metals, but in fact, an enormous variety of commodities, from cowrie shells to feathers to large stones to tobacco to iron, as in Japan, have at one time or another, in one place or another, served as the monetary medium." And of course, we have seen all this in our survey of the history of money. The thing that we are focusing on now is indeed that fiat money is an innovation. We are living in an age of wonders. The end of specie standards, writes Friedman, specie, i.e. tangible commodity standards, and the emergence of a world monetary system in which every country, in Fisher terms, has an irredeemable paper money. You can't redeem it with anything else. I.e., as we said, the dissipation of the illusion or the disenchantment of the money world from the fixation on something tangible. This has produced two very different streams of literature, and we will see in a moment where these discussions fall within these streams. One scientific, the other popular. The scientific literature is that already referred to, dealing with monetary reform and the government's role in providing outside money. The popular literature is alarmist and hard money, essentially all of it based on the proposition that Fisher's generalization will continue to hold, that the world is inevitably condemned to runaway inflation unless and until the leading nations once again adopt commodity standards. And as we have seen, these hard-nosed alarmists are still around with us, even though it has been many years now, and governments have shown that they are able to manipulate their fiat money in such a way as to stabilize the economy, but not sufficiently. This is still a work in progress. And as we have seen, and we will analyze in greater depth, the housing crisis, the subprime crisis that almost crashed the world in the Great Recession in 2008, also gave rise to many such alarmists and what we called the tangibility clingers, and which Milton refers to as the hard money people. Anyway, so obviously we are on the side of the scientific literature, as it were, because we are trying to understand what's really happening rather than imposing the dogma of something that was never really true. It was all illusion. Anyway, so perhaps even those alarmists know that it's an illusion, or maybe they don't, I don't know. But maybe they think it's an important illusion, because most people have that illusion. They do not, it's like in religion. You have the dogma, you don't think about it, you accept it. So saying that religion is contingent on culture or all these historicist views, they undermine religion. In the same way, departing from hard currencies undermine the concept of money by revealing the true illusion, revealing that money is indeed just fiat. It's always been fiat, even when it was attached to a commodity. It was just because people agreed. It wasn't by fiat, it was by dictation. It was because people agreed that this is of value, that isurium was the ultimate arbitrator of value. Interestingly enough, writes Milton Friedman, there has been little intersection between these two streams. In my opinion, the scientific literature has largely evaded the question raised by the popular literature. Have the conditions that have produced the current unprecedented monetary system been accompanied by developments that change the likelihood that it will go the way of earlier paper standards? The rest of this paper offers some tentative and preliminary observations on this question. Actually, we already know part of the answer to that question. There is no going back. We remain on fiat, even though the alarmists continue to issue books now under such names as the non-repentant view of economy, or the non-politically correct view of the economy, i.e. if you're against fiat, you are non-politically correct. Or the truth about the way that the government is actually stealing from the rich, i.e. those who still have tangible commodities, hold gold in their safes, and they print money irresponsibly and so on. All these doomsayers continue to produce, and they are renewed every day, because there is so much still not clear about this intangibility. In fact, as we will see throughout the series, we are in a period of history that is developing, and part of the whole idea, the whole raison d'etre of this series of talks about the theology of the real is to sustain us in our belief in the goodness of the transition that we are going through, in the goodness and the ultimate benefit that we will ultimately derive from our growing creativity, because the world progresses, the economy progresses, and as we shall see, it progresses even though there's a lot of pain, a lot of conflict, a lot of lack of clarity, yet it progresses in a direction of greater empowerment of individuals, of greater empowerment of people who were before barred from entering the market. And we see that this is the trend, and it's still going on. And this, even though we have not yet achieved the perfect balance, it gives us the optimism to know that we are in the right direction, and there is no need to return to something that has never been real and ultimately proved itself to be quite pernicious, as we saw in the Great Depression. All these harking to tangibilities, in fact, broke the economy. So Friedman writes that the key challenge that faces us in currently reforming our monetary and fiscal institutions is to find a substitute for convertibility into specie that will serve the same function of inhibiting resort to inflation as a source of government revenue. Because in the past, because they had to conform to the gold, they couldn't just print money and cause inflation. They had to limit themselves. But this, of course, broke the economy. So they had to strike a balance. And now Friedman points to some part of these balances. He writes that counter pressures have developed that reduce the political attractiveness of paper money inflation. The most important such developments, I believe, arise from the greater sensitivity and sophistication of both the public at large and the financial market with respect to inflation, thanks to the information revolution, which has greatly reduced the cost of acquiring information and which has enabled expectations to respond more promptly and accurately to economic disturbances, including changes in government policy. So indeed, this is part of the great transformation of our age, the age of information. I remind you once more that the first smartphone, unbelievably as it may sound, came into the market, as far as I remember, in 2009. Maybe it was 2007? No, I think it was the first Android, at least, was 2009. At the time of this recording, 2019, 10 years have gone by, a decade. And it's like this whole new world. It's like, wow, who can imagine a world without a smartphone? Everything, most of our lives are conducted through this medium of communication that interconnects us with others. And where money is concerned, this is also very important because it allows the interconnectivity we need to keep the economy balanced. Okay, Friedman saw this already in 1985. I think we've done with Friedman. Let me see if I have anything more. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to move to another author writing on the matter of money and fiat. And this is George Macesich writing on political economy of money, emerging fiat monetary regimes. This is also quite an old text. It's 1999, at the turn of the century. And he writes about the basic problem with fiat monetary regime is the ease with which it lends itself to political manipulation. Of course, any government, everything was given. Even the gold standard, because governments wanted to adhere to the gold standard, they manipulated the economy to adhere and broke it in the Great Depression. So, but because fiat money is just printing money, a government can just decide that we are going to flood the market with our money, make a lot of money, we're going to grow rich. And of course, that leads to inflation because money very quickly loses its value. People begin to distrust it. And this is a basic problem with fiat money. Political and economic wisdom is seldom the characteristic of such manipulation. All too often, it is subject to human error and the vagaries of socio-political forces. So it's like, politics, like in an election economy and so on. What is to be done? Asks Macesich. Macesich. I don't know how to pronounce. Anyway, what is? You can see what you can see at the top. You can see here the name. Anyway, what is to be done? Many observers whose grasp of history leaves much to be desired, what an understatement, present solutions that have been tried in the past and found wanting. These are those callers for the hard currency that Friedman was decrying before. Still others firmly grip current solutions and institutions with little regard for economic theory and reality. Fixed exchange rates will not work thanks in good part to the contemporary operation of the fiat monetary regime by nation states. Pegged but adjustable exchange rates will not work owing to their inability to withstand the operation of integrated world capital markets. Currency boards may work if a country is willing to give up its sovereignty. Thus far, few countries are willing to do so and live without a central bank. A currency union does have a central bank. Its success, however, depends very much on the willingness of independent nation states to integrate seriously into such a union. The European Union and the Euro are a work in progress as much as political as economic. So because that is fixed. And we have seen how the Euro is compared to the gold standard in that it petrifies, freezes the ability of the national governments within the European Union to actually change their currencies according to the needs of their economies. But actually, because actually any such petrification of the money exchange rate is a problem in an international context, because whenever a government tries to fix its exchange rate in order to improve its ability to compete with other countries in trade, there will be a run on its currency by speculators who wait for its money to equalize naturally with the currencies of other countries. So in fact, in an international situation, each sovereign country has a currency that is actually backed by the strength of the nation, and the interplay between currencies in a flexible exchange rate is what creates the true balance of the world. And any attempt to harden the currencies has until now proved quite detrimental to development. And indeed, Macesich writes that flexible or floating exchange rates, as discussed in this study, are another solution that, among other reasons, has the appeal that they may well operate successfully within a world of fiat monetary regimes operated by independent nation states, and in a world that is very distant indeed from an optimal currency area. It is a solution long advocated by Milton Friedman. It is also a solution that allows markets to work and so promote global prosperity. So we see the solution: increased flexibility, increased freedom, allowing this medium, this imagined medium of value that is money, to actually fluctuate against the monies of other nations, one nation against the other, so that the wealth of the nations, as it were, is actually the basis of the money now. So let's have a look at this exchange rate solution, flexible exchange rate solution that has become, in fact, the de facto way in which most governments behave today. Indeed, let us look for a second at what's happening at the moment in the Wikipedia item concerning the floating exchange rate. Is a type of exchange rate regime in which currency's value is allowed to fluctuate in response to foreign exchange market events. In fact, this is the main interaction between nations. And in fact, as we saw, this interaction has always been there. And a lot of the breaking of nations came because there was not enough cooperation between nations, as no nation is an island unto itself where money is concerned. Everything is interconnected, and we saw this quite a few times. So in the modern world, we see here, Most of the world's currencies are floating. They include the most widely traded currencies: the United States dollar, the Swiss franc, the Indian rupee, the euro, the Japanese yen, the British pound, and the Australian dollar. However, central banks often participate in the markets to attempt to influence the value of floating exchange rates. The Canadian dollar most closely resembles a pure floating currency because the Canadian Central Bank has not interfered with its price since it officially stopped doing so in 1998. The US dollar runs a close second, with very little change in its foreign reserves. In contrast, Japan and the UK intervene to a great extent, and India has seen medium-range intervention by its central bank. And of course, this intervention takes the form of buying or selling its own currency, thus raising or lowering its exchange rate. So if we were to return to the text that we were looking at, the text by George Macesich, then let's have a look at this solution of the flexible exchange rate. A flexible exchange rate solution is appropriate to the basic fiat monetary problem that arises from the fact that in a world of many sovereign governments, few are willing to forego money creation. All governments want to control the ability to manipulate the economy. It's their economy. They want to take care of it. If there's problems, they want to solve them. So they want to create money when necessary. For purposes of illustration, consider two countries, A and B. If the government of either country, A or B, for example, lowers or raises expenditures, borrowing the difference from its own banks or from the central banks, both countries may suffer inflationary consequences, while only the agile government gets what it buys with money. If one of the countries uses budgetary policy in a conscious and responsible way to combat inflation, it may find itself continually raising taxes and cutting its budget, while the other country, which is causing the inflation by lowering taxes and in general increasing its expenditures, is deriving the benefits. So this country, full of austerity, is actually penalizing its citizens, while the other country, which is not austere, is having empowering its economy. They are both influencing each other. The monetary system and banking system, in effect, constitute a pool of purchasing power available to the governments of the countries considered. An understanding must be reached on how the several countries will share the available purchasing power. Every country depends on the others. The international money scene, and this is part of the rise of global civilization in our times, is also contingent on the cooperation of governments as regards money. And we have seen indeed the enlistment of the G20, and we will look at it in a further discussion, following the Great Recession, and how, in fact, the intervention of central banks worldwide prevented a crash on par with the Great Depression. A flexible exchange rate arrangement, writes George Macesich, is especially suitable in a world consisting of culturally, linguistically, and economically disparate nation-states, which is our world. It would permit each country to develop its economy within the confines of its territory according to its own appraisal of possibilities. Flexible exchange rates provide an automatic trade balancing mechanism, thereby eliminating the necessity for exchange and trade controls. At the same time, the individual nations are freed from having to coordinate monetary and fiscal policies and economic development programs with other nations. Encroachment into the delicate area of national sovereignty is minimized. As a consequence, the chance of world prosperity is enhanced. So, flexible exchange rate also needs less treaties. It's just buying and selling in the world market, one currency against the other. And the robustness of the economy dictates the level of its products. Once an economy becomes less robust, its money devalues, and thereby its imports gain an advantage, and so it becomes more robust, and so on. It's an ongoing balance, and this is achieved in a way that allows each sovereign to dictate its own terms and manipulate its own economy. So moving on in George Macesich, we come to a point where he discusses how, in fact, what lies behind money is actually what we have been discussing throughout: the trust, the social bond, the social covenant. So let's look at this. This is on page 115 of his book, Political Economy of Money, Emerging Fiat Money Regime. So he writes, according to the Austrian view, money and the monetary system is the unintended product of social evolution in much the same fashion as the legal system. Okay, we will be discussing the legal system, the evolution of the legal system in future videos. We are currently dealing with money, and we have further subject to deal with, the legal system. Then we have, okay, I'll not get ahead of myself. There's a lot of areas that we still have to discuss in looking at the progress of civilization and the way that it becomes more and more accessible to each individual and protective of the rights of the individual. In any case, money is a social institution, a public good. It is not simply another durable good held in the form of real balances, as we have been saying again and again, by utility maximizing individuals or profit maximizing firms, as Keynesian and quantity theorist views hold. As we said, it's all in the thesaurus. There's nothing tangible. Everything tangible is just an application of certain dogmas to reality, but it's not really there. There is no real balance. And we will see how this idea of real prices versus nominal prices is also a way of maintaining a transition and maintaining a balance in the transition from these monies that relied on commodities and the current regime of fiat money. However useful, writes Macesich, however useful the tools of demand and supply analysis applied to money as a private durable good, Keynesians and quantity theorists miss the full consequences of monetary instability and also stability. In essence, the monetary system is an integral part of the social fabric, whose threads include faith and trust. Of course, as we have been saying throughout, this is everything. Faith and trust is the basis of it all. If we just for a second go back to our main slide, where was it? The one with the thesaurus. Why is it all on faith and trust? Because of fiat, fundamental ignorance of the individual. We don't know, and we can't know, so we have to rely on group sharing, on others, on the social fabric. And therefore we live in the thesaurus, the inter-subjective world of others represented in our mind. So that is, in fact, the very essence of the social fabric that money is a manifestation of. Not just an integral part. It's a manifestation of this faith and trust, and this makes it possible to exercise rational choice and the development of human freedom. This is misunderstood by the very people who benefit from it. This is great stuff. It's always so gladdening when you meet texts that confirm your conjectures, isn't it? Confirmation bias. So I'm biased in favor of this text without doubt. It is this misunderstanding of the social role of money as a critical element in the market mechanism and the need for confidence in the stability of its purchasing power that came to dominate much of Keynesian and quantity theorist monetary thought in the post-World War II period. This misunderstanding is the ideological key to the use of discretionary monetary policies for monetary expansion as an unfailing means of increasing output and employment and reducing interest rates. Indeed, once we realize that the basic thing about money is trust, keep that trust, and once we direct ourselves, instead of all these multifangled plans that have to do with various conceptions of stability hinging on some idea of the real or tangible values, if we focus on trust, on faith, on belief, perhaps we would be able to find better solutions for the instability inherent in trust, because it is always liable to distrust. And there have been many studies now showing that where money is concerned, we are quicker to distrust than to trust. So it's very fragile. And since this is the essence of money, trust, then this is an issue that lies before us. And concluding with Macesich, on page 118, he writes that long before kindness, George Simmel in The Philosophy of Money underscores that an unmanaged or free monetary order was cast in doubt because doubt undermines trust. And he identifies two likely sources of trouble for a free monetary order. One source is that since individuals do not receive income in kind but in money, they are exposed to the uncertainties originating in fluctuations in the purchasing power of money. And these fluctuations are vulnerable and sensitive to the amount of money flooded into the economy, the amount of money printed by Fiat, the interest rates, and so on. The other is that the very success of a free monetary order encourages the development of socialist or collectivist ideas that serve to undermine the individualistic order based on free markets and money. And that is another thing that we already touched on, the solutions that attempt to turn their back on money, the communist solutions, the Nazi solutions, and so on. And we will look at them again, how totalitarian solutions try to solve the problem by strengthening authority, strengthening hierarchy, strengthening, in fact, a dogma that undermines freedom of both the individual and the market itself. In any case, George Simmel, in his Philosophy of Money, has a lot to say that is compatible with what we have been discussing, and we will relegate a separate discussion or two maybe to his seminal Philosophy of Money and see what kind of insights we can garner from that work. In any case, this concludes our historical survey of the development of money, and the next few discussions will be devoted to various implications of the workings of money within the real, such as debt, the issue of debt. We will also look at the housing crisis, the subprime bubble and its bursting, and we will consider various possible solutions to the problems besetting trust in an economy that often undermines trust, especially where disempowered or even dispossessed, we can say, disenfranchised. Yeah, I think disenfranchised is the best term. Disenfranchised from full participation in the money market And when we look at the subprime, we'll see the attempt to enfranchise these people and how this collapsed and led to a much greater collapse. We will look at some different aspects of empowerment, especially of women, such as and of the poor of the world, the famous microloans now being spread around the world. And in short, we will look at many of the implications of what we have been discussing now that we have a clear vision of the actual nature of money and of its evolution in the course of the history of human civilization. So keep well.